Are you having trouble with games crashing because your graphics card gets too hot? Most tutorials online give bad advice about how to control your GPU with overclocking software like MSI Afterburner. I will be using MSI Afterburner to gain full control over my graphics card. If you wish to follow along, you should change your settings to match mine. We need to unlock the curve editor in order to see how all of this actually works. You may also use my custom fan settings. Now let's look at our curve editor to see how our graphics card performs with increasing power. As we can see, beyond about 1050 MHz we get diminishing returns. Adjusting the core clock shifts the entire curve up or down. We can in principle increase the clock and lower the power to get the exact same frequency. However, it's best to leave the default voltage to frequency pairing. We don't need to change the core clock to overclock anyways. The power limit at 100% is below the threshold for diminishing returns, so we don't need to worry about inefficiency. It helps us to have the relationship between frequency and voltage be a constant because we can then focus on adjusting the frequency and ignore voltage altogether. This is the critical mistake everyone is making in their overclock videos. They tell you to shift the voltage curve upwards instead of simply delivering more power. There is a temperature consideration when shifting your voltage curve upwards, which we know from overclocking raises the temperature of your graphics card. The trade-off for a higher frequency with less power is a higher temperature. So we leave the core clock alone completely and base our clocking control on power delivery. To do this, we must click on the temperature tab of the curve editor. The temperature limit is indicated by this yellow vertical line. The temperature limit is another mistake everyone makes by keeping it maxed out. This value is simply the temperature at which you gain manual control over the graphics card's power delivery, and since we want full control, this value should be as low as possible. Before we continue, we must understand the relationship between temperature and all of your fans, heat sinks and water tubes. Every graphics card setup has a maximum amount of heat it can remove before the temperature runs away. If your graphics card is gaining heat faster than it dumps heat, you will quickly reach the temperature at which your graphics card is designed for a massive power drop-off. Video games that crash from overheating to so because your frequency drops to idle frequencies from reaching that temperature. So, to avoid crashing video games, we need to ensure that we never reach that maximum temperature. For my card, that maximum is 87 degrees and it drops to 300 MHz. We are going to control the temperature by controlling the voltage. Remember, the voltage can also be expressed by its corresponding frequency, so we can define which frequency we want and at which temperature. We can overclock the crap out of the card in the lower temperature ranges, but as the heat builds we must ramp down the heating process by dialing down the frequency. Remember what I said about heat generation. Control over the fan speed is how we will know when the GPU has reached the max amount of heat it can remove. At 100% fan speed, heat removal has reached its maximum value. Any further heat generation will lead to a rise in temperature that cannot be stopped without a sudden drop in voltage, also known as a game crash or blue screen of death. This means we need to find frequencies that are stable below 100% fan speed. With some experimenting, I've found that beyond 80 to 81 degrees my card's heat will begin to run away. To get the best performance with the best heat efficiency, I ramp down in voltage to 85 degrees, beyond which we have no control. The trial and error part is in finding the right slope that acts as a buffer to prevent it from exceeding your fan's heat removal. What creates stability, flexibility and performance is the rocking back and forth as the card delivers power and takes it away at the highest speeds the card can handle without overheating. I will show you what all of this looks like when booting up and playing a video game. Pay attention to the temperature and frequency on the chart. You might be wondering why I don't use a straight line and then do a dramatic drop-off, and that's because big jumps like that result in freeze stuttering. So if I'm going to approach the maximum temperature my card can handle, I'd prefer a gradual drop-off in frequency. We're already overclocking the crap out of this thing, so be happy that you will get a fast boot with a steady decline to your maximum stable frequency. The temperature will continually rise at these voltages.
Far away
Watch as the frequency follows the temperature.
Are crawling in the shadows again.
I think the bar represents how high the card can go at its peak. This seems to suggest I can go beyond 2000 MHz early in the boot-up stage. I will experiment later and see how high I can realistically go. It's taking quite a while to heat up to 80 degrees. When it reaches about 79 to 81 degrees, it will stop going up. Even during gameplay with other players in PvP. If you find that the temperature gets stuck, then you know you're good to raise the frequency. However, some games can have sudden large spikes, so you need to be careful when finding the maximum temperature your card can support without running away, while still also giving it a buffer in case of any large spikes. You'll see when I start playing that the temperature is very stable, but sometimes in video games a whole bunch of particles, effects, models and animations will all suddenly come together at once. If you find that this happens to you, then you should increase the downward slope to manage these spikes on your own. I'm going to close my second monitor, my web browser. I'll point out the temperature throughout the gameplay and we'll see how good my tuning is. Every time I record with NVIDIA Shadowplay, the game eventually crashes. After thinking about it for some time, I decided the best thing would be to increase the downward slope beyond 80 degrees. Temperatures above 80 degrees cannot be cooled with just the fan speed, so I made the downward slope reach a slower speed. And to compensate for the increase in steepness, I moved the final temperature over by 1 degree. In the future I can move down and to the right one more time. Let's see how this goes. Success. Completed a round without crashing, while recording in 1080p and tabbing out to the monitoring software. Look at how stable the temperature is on the graph, resting in the high 70s and low 80s. This was the region that we targeted because it's the hottest my cooling system can maintain. Through experimentation, trying to hit even 81 degrees is asking for trouble, but your cooling systems will be different than mine. By now you should be able to use my knowledge and ideas to safely experiment with your graphics card in order to max out its performance and heat efficiency. I care because too many players are crashing out of rounds and I lose the match. Century, Age of Ashes, is really demanding on your graphics card, so it will quickly push the card to a temperature that it cannot handle. Most players are instructed to ignore these considerations and let the default temperature control do its thing. However, as I have shown, not only can we make our graphics card more stable, we can also make it perform better and be more energy efficient at the same time. This translates to full mastery over your graphics card. It truly is a win-win-win scenario. Fin.